Well, there's a new report that just came out in the Blaze, and it's an exclusive that you're going to want to read. It's about General Mark Milley and the Pentagon approving direct energy weapons during those June 2020 DC riots. Now, it's a very, very interesting report given the fact that we're just learning this now. So, joining me to detail what he's learning is the great reporter over at the Blaze. Please welcome to the show, Steve Baker. Steve, you've done a great job, again, uncovering something that looks like the federal government was trying to potentially agitate the already agitated crowd back in 2020 outside in DC. So break down your latest report, because we're just learning about this now because Mark Milley opened his mouth recently.
Yeah, he did. He was in a meeting. I'm going to refrain at this time from saying where and exactly how many people were involved, but they were all officers. They were all senior military officers, in which one of them happens to be our source for this conversation. And in this meeting, Mark Milley, former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, during that June 2020 and the Summer of Love riots, but specifically there at Lafayette Park in D.C., we learned that he mentioned to this group of officers that he, in fact, authorized the use of both heat and sound non-kinetic weapons. Well, that's directed energy weapons. That's what that means by non-kinetic. In other words, there's no entry wound, there's no exit wound, there's no hitting somebody over the head with a baton or hitting them with a less than lethal dose of a bear spray or some other sort of, a chemical deterrent or tear gas or rubber bullets. That's what a non-kinetic thing is a directed energy weapon. Now, we don't have verifiable proof from the video that we have poured through of that incident that the DOD elements of the crowd that were in the crowd that day, and from down here at Fort Liberty, they changed the name. It'll always be Fort Bragg for those of us that live in North Carolina. But we don't have the evidence that they used whatever they brought, but we did find video proof that the United States Park Police did in fact use a small backpack version of an LRAD. That's a long-range audio device. It comes from the same technology that was developed by the military for these crowd control, riot control, frontline battle type devices. And so what we did is we started putting together the pieces of the puzzle. Now, Breanna, as you know, I've been probably working on this for, exactly 4 years this week, as a matter of fact. It was 4 years ago this week, in the days following January 6th of 2021, that I was working on doing frame-by-frame analysis of my own video from January 6th and starting to write my story, that I was actually staying with a special operative, special operations specialist. I'll just say tier 1 for now. Those who know what that means know what it means. And while at his house, he would be leaning over my shoulder, looking at my videos, and he would be pointing things out to me and saying, this is what's happening here. This is what this person's job is. This is what her job is. Watch how they handle themselves. Watch how they disappear into the crowd. They do their thing, and then they move along. And he started explaining to me that this is the kind of activities, the kind of actions that they take in overseas operations in hotspots around the world, color revolution operations. Our special forces are expert at starting riots. Well, look, a year ago this week, my mind went, and I started looking into all of these things. And one of the things that I stumbled upon was the fact that we have much more advanced directed energy weapons than just these small LRADs that we showed in the first article. We have much more advanced weapons than the riot control microwave, truck mounted weapons, which are all open source. As a matter of fact, you can go on YouTube and you can see DOD presentations of these weapons being used, even with journalists and Congress members volunteering themselves to be hit by one of these microwave weapons and take the blast. They can see and feel how it's all open source. This is not science fiction. It's not UFO. It's not Alex Jones tinfoil hat crap. This is real stuff. And this is what we're endeavoring to do, Joe Hanneman and myself, is to dig and base everything on the science that we know. Not only the open source science, but also what we're hearing from our DOD and intelligence community sources right now.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting. I want to talk more about what specifically this does when they use these types of weapons. I'm assuming it agitates the crowd, but do you think it maybe provoked them to become more violent and more aggressive towards law enforcement?
Well, in fact, there are types of these weapons that do exactly that thing. Now, from the Department of Interior IG report that we reference in this particular article, we talk about how they even talked about how some of the rioters ran away confused at the use of these LRAD devices. And then we also kind of hint towards the use of these, or the other class of these weapons that everybody knows is that creates the Havana syndrome. This is something that Catherine Herridge reported on a week and a half ago. She got a CIA whistleblower to come out and talk about this. Again, this is not fantasy. This is not science fiction. This is not UFO stuff. This is all scientific. It's in the open source literature. It's available to anybody that wants to know about it. And that's a kind of a second class, but there's a third class of these weapons. And these are the ones that are focused and can target individuals. And they do it typically not only with what they call infrasound or ultrasound, but more frequently with RF waves, microwave, radio frequency waves that resonate with different parts of the body. Now, okay, I'm gonna try and I'm gonna try and give you the version of this for the average listener. All right, and this is best for me to be able to absorb it as well. And as it has been explained to me by our own sources who actually participated in the development and the testing of these particular devices, this is how it was explained to me. If you look at the antenna on an old car, pickup truck, or whatever, 70s, 80s, 90s, or whatever, an antenna on the car produces a resonance when it's hit with a particular range of radio frequencies. That's why we can pick up an AM signal, an FM signal on our car radio, is that antenna is designed to resonate only at that frequency. But that frequency doesn't affect us. Even though it's in the air and it's all around us, it does not resonate with our body parts. But the science, and we go all the way back to the 1950s in the Soviet Union when they were researching, studying, and developing what they called psychotronic weapons. They were developing these weapons and learning what parts of the body resonate at different frequency ranges. And that's where this science has gone over the last 70 years, is that they have discovered that the lungs will resonate at a certain frequency. The heart will resonate. The different folds of the brain, the different lobes of the brain will resonate at different frequencies, as if it's just finely attenuated. They can resonate in this part of the brain just with a slight change. They can resonate in this. And by so doing, they can control and influence behaviors. Like, as we talked about, we had a very highly placed former, again, I have to be careful and remember how we worded it in the article, but it's a former commander of, very high-ranking commander over Special Operations Command in the Army. And his exact words to me were, as we showed in the article, that these particular types of advanced weapons, with them, they can stop your heart, they can make you shit your pants, or they can affect other parts and other organs in your body. And so with that, we understand now that they can not only make you go crazy, and they can do that with both audio and RF frequency agitation weapons. We also know that they can make you hear voices in your head. They can influence violence. They can influence behaviors that you never would have otherwise engaged in whatsoever. Mm. But as we've seen from the Havana class of these, Havana syndrome class of these things, they can make you have long-term, very, very horrific long-term health effects as well.
Steve, I'm going to ask you, because you were there on January 6th, and this sounds like a lot of the stories that we heard from people. I mean, I know I heard individuals saying that they never really thought they were going to go into the Capitol, even though they weren't violent that day, that they felt like they weren't acting like themselves. Do you think weapons like this possibly were used on J6 as well? Because it sounds like this was used possibly to make things more chaotic under President Trump.
This has always been something that I have been curious about. Now, I have no evidence whatsoever
Okay.
that these more advanced, quote unquote, RF agitation weapons were used on January 6th. We do not have the evidence of that. We do, in fact, have the evidence that the lower end LRAD, I should say A, LRAD, consistent with the same model and type that was used at Lafayette Park, was in fact used on the West Terrace that day. I can also tell you from my own video evidence, I told you I've been on this for 4 years, from my own camera,
Yes.
that that weapon was not used effectively. It is supposed to be a crowd control device. It's supposed to clear an area. I can tell you that we have the operators on camera confused about how to use it, didn't know how to, and ineffectively deployed it. I have it on my own camera. That's coming in part 2 of our series. But it's very curious because of all the trials I've covered, and we have dozens and dozens of testimonies, particularly during sentencing hearings, of these individuals talking to the judge, crying, tears running down their face, saying, "Your Honor, I don't know what happened to me that day. I've never had
Mhm.
a day of violence in my life. I've never participated in a domestic violence. I've never had a criminal charge against me other than a speeding ticket in my entire life. And for some reason, I lost it that day. I don't know what came over me." Now, Breanna, a really good agent provocateur, skilled in the arts of starting riots, fanning the flames of riots, creating color revolutions, can do that. That same special operations commander who said to me that we can stop your heart, we can make you shit your pants, he also went on to say, and this will be in our second story, or second part 2 of the story.
Mm.
He also went on to say, would not need that for January 6th. He said, I would only need 4 or 5 of my best guys to make January 6th happen.
Steve, that has me on edge because Ashley Babbitt, who we know lost her life on January 6th when she was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer. We know that her family. I know a lot of people ask, why was she there that day? Why did she make her way into the Capitol that day? Why was she at that point going to be getting closer to lawmakers? Why? And a lot of people did. I think it was her husband I heard this from, but don't quote me on this. Said that she uh, had anxiety. She's a veteran, so she had anxiety from being in a claustrophobic area, and she might have been trying to escape.
This is,
Does that sound like
look,
this might have? Yeah.
yeah, our sources who are, as I mentioned earlier, who participated in science, research, development, R&D, participated in the field deployment uh, um, uh, engineering of these smaller backpack size concealable agitation weapons, who to continue to work and do testing on them as well. What they have told us is that someone with PSD, this will drive them batshit crazy. And so we look at
Oh.
all of those that were former military who never had a history of
Mhm.
violence that were jacked up in January 6th. We're talking about lieutenant colonels. We're talking about Air Force pilots. We're talking about Green Beret. We're talking about all manner of people who had never participated in this type of thing ever in their life. We're talking about law enforcement officers of all types, FBI to local sheriffs, all the way to firemen, people who
Mhm.
have been in a career for 20 years plus that could, in fact, create levels of psychological PTSD. And as a result of being exposed to this type of weapon, they can, in fact, lose it. I don't
Mhm.
have proof that that happened on January 6th. We just know that the weapon exists. We know what we saw happen that day. We know that we have the experience from courtroom testimonies, trial transcripts, sentencing hearings of people that talk about having no understanding about why they acted that way that day as compared to the rest of their life, whether the rest of their life was 30 years or 60 or 70 years. We also have the most unusual of circumstances, and I can't reconcile this mathematically, but we have 4 people that dropped dead that day. We have
Mhm.
Phillips, we have Boylan, all of whom's heart stopped. But then we also, at 10 p.m. that night, we had Brian Sicknick, who collapsed. Now, he died the next day, but he collapsed that night. And by the way, these types of agitation weapons have the potential to affect people on both sides of the police line.
Steve, it's horrifying, yeah, because it would make sense that it would affect both sides if they don't have a way of actually just making sure it doesn't affect their own. So they're could potentially subject their own people to it as well. But again, I mean, I've spoken to a bunch of J6ers. A lot of them don't have any recollection as to how they ended up right at the front of the Capitol steps. And so I think that's telling in itself as well. So, Steve, I'm glad you're on this. There's a lot to look into. I mean, I hope we could get to the bottom of this, especially since there's going to be a change in administration soon. But I'm sure they'd like to hide this because would this would destroy our federal government if this were to be proven potentially to have happened. So I look forward to seeing your part two in all of this,
Yeah.
Steve.
And I want to say,
Yeah.
before we sign off here, I'm not going to make claims on your show or anybody else's show or on Blaze or in one of our articles about things that we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
And do not know that this was deployed. But we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that is making us look for it in the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're hearing that this happened in June of 2020, what's stopping them from using it on January 6th of 2021? I don't know. But again, we don't have the evidence to directly claim that they did 100% use it. This is just pure speculation at this point. But Steve, I'm excited for your part two, and I'm excited to learn more about this because I think this is really telling. I think our federal government needs to wake up. And you know what? We're going to get great people in the Pentagon soon. Pete Hegseth is likely to be confirmed. And I'm sure this is something that he's going to want to look into as well, because this is something that he'd be really upset if he found out was used on the American people. So we shall see. Steve Baker, as always, incredible work. You never disappoint me. For our audience at home right now looking to read in on all of this, you got to head over to theblaze.com and give it a look. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. If you didn't know, let me explain to you who I am, because we are now available on several different platforms, including The Mel K Show, as well as Graham Allen's new platform, Dear America Plus. My name is Breanna. I left the corporate media world, and I was there for over 10 years. And after leaving Fox Corp because they wanted me to comply with an illegal private sector COVID vaccine mandate, I went on this venture into independent journalism. And because of all of that, we now have this great show. I cover all the topics the corporate media refuses to cover. But with that comes a little bit of a risk. We don't get funding from any type of corrupt corporations or foreign governments. We're strictly funded by you all at home. So if you like to support independent journalism and all the great work that we try to do here at the Breanna Morello Show, head on over right now to supportbre.com. That's supportbre.com. We've set up a platform for you to become a direct donor to this show. You can make a monthly donation or make a one-time donation. The monthly donations are greatly appreciated, though, because it lets us figure out budgeting. And that is very important when you're trying to get researcher and other hands on deck to create a program like this. So do me a favor, please, please, please head on over right now to supportbre.com. Make that either one-time donation or monthly donation. You get to pick the dollar amount, and it's safe and secure through Donor Box. So again, folks, it is supportbre.com. That's supportbre.com. That's how you keep independent journalism alive.